Why is it that the pain born inside our own home is sometimes the one that destroys us the most? I asked myself that question in the exact second I felt his hand snap against my face, a blow that didn't come only from physical force, but from some dark, distant place where my son no longer saw me as a mother or as a woman or even as a human being. And in the silence that settled right after, heavy, suffocating, a silence that screamed every truth he didn't have the courage to say, I knew something had broken between us. That moment would mark my life forever, not because of the sting on my skin, but because of the pain that tore open inside my chest, a deep pain, the kind only a mother understands when she realizes she just lost a piece of herself. I want you, who are listening to me right now, to do something important. Tell me in the comments where you're from, your city, your state, your country, because this story isn't just mine. This story crosses borders, crosses oceans, crosses entire generations. This story comes from forgotten neighborhoods, small towns, tight-knit communities, big cities that grow upward and tiny ones that grow inward. This story belongs to many women, many mothers, many families, and in a way, it belongs to you too. It doesn't matter if you're listening from Brazil, Angola, Maranhão, Mozambique, Bahia, Portugal, Cape Verde, Venezuela, the United States, a small town in the middle of nowhere, or a neighborhood overlooked by the rest of the world. What I'm about to say echoes anywhere a mother is fighting not to lose her child to anger, to the world, to the darkness that sometimes grows inside a home. When that slap hit my face, the first thing I felt wasn't fear, it wasn't shock, it wasn't anger. The first thing I felt was emptiness, a hollow so wide it seemed to swallow everything around it. And inside that emptiness, a single question burned. How did we get here? How did that little boy I once rocked in my arms, the one who slept against my chest, who wrapped his whole hand around just one of my fingers, manage to look at me with so much fury? How can love, this maternal love we swear is unbreakable, crack like that, be wounded like that, be crushed like that? I stood still, frozen. His hand was still trembling. His eyes were full of a rage I had never seen before. It wasn't irritation. It wasn't exhaustion. It wasn't stress. It was something else, something darker, sharper, something that seemed to have been building inside him for years. Then came the words that still hurt more than the slap itself, words that repeat in my mind when the night gets too quiet, words no child should ever say to a mother, words no mother's heart should ever have to hear. And yet, there I was, listening to every single one of them, as if they were little knives being pushed into me one by one. And you know what's worse? It's not just the pain of the moment. It's not just the shock. It's not the mark that stays on, the skin. It's the memory, the echo, the look in his eyes that no longer resembled the look I once knew. My son's eyes, the eyes of that good boy, full of life, seemed to have vanished behind someone I didn't recognize anymore. And that is devastating. Because when the world hurts you, you take a deep breath and think, at least I have my home, at least I have my child, at least I have my safe place. But when the wound comes from inside your own home, you lose the safe place, lose the ground under your feet, lose your compass. You ask yourself, if my own child turns away from me, who is going to take my hand? The house went quiet, a heavy quiet, the kind that makes you hear the sound of your own heartbeat. And in that silence, I felt something that hurt even more than the slap. I felt that I had lost him, not forever, but I felt I had lost the son I knew. I felt that invisible bond we believe no storm can break had been shattered. And yet there it was, torn apart, like a golden thread covered in dust. No one notices when it snaps, but when it does, it leaves a hole so deep it hurts to breathe. I sat down slowly, trying to piece together the fragments of that moment, trying to remember when he began to drift away, when his frustration began spilling onto me, when that sweet boy began carrying so much anger. And it wasn't just any anger. It was anger with a target, anger with an address, anger he somehow believed I deserved. And that is the kind of pain only those who have lived it know how heavy it is. I know a lot of people will hear this and think, I've been through something similar. I know. And that's why I want you to write in the comments where you're listening from. Because when you write it, You're not just answering me. You're telling the world, I exist too. I feel this too. I understand. And when women from across the Americas, Africa, Europe, everywhere, recognize themselves in this pain, they realize they're not alone. I still remember exactly how my face burned. I remember the shape of his hand marked on my skin, like a scar only I could see. But what truly marked me was understanding that slap didn't come from my son. It came from his pain, from his rage, from his confusion. And that doesn't make it right. It doesn't make it fair. It only makes it sadder, more tragic. Because when a child raises a hand against their own mother, it's not just the mother who's lost. The child is lost too. I stood there trying to breathe, trying to hold back the tears that slipped out no matter how hard I fought them. And at the same time, something inside me whispered, don't fall apart yet. Not now, not in front of him. Because whatever was happening, whatever had taken hold of his heart, I still believed that behind all that anger, there was a boy crying for help. A boy who didn't know how to handle his fears, his frustrations, his wounds. A boy who, in a twisted way, thought I was the reason for all the pain he carried. And in that moment, I realized a harsh truth. Sometimes the heart you tried hardest to protect is the one that hurts you the most. Sometimes the love you gave is the first thing forgotten when life weighs heavy on the shoulders of the one you raised. Sometimes the mother becomes the target simply because she's the only one who never left. And those who are always there tend to take the hit from emotions no one knows how to manage. I closed my eyes for a second, trying to understand how things had reached that point, trying to remember every sign I might have ignored. Because a mother always has that intuition, that sixth sense that warns when something is wrong. And now, looking back, I can see the signs were all there. The distant eyes, the constant irritability, the sharp words, the heavy silence at dinner, the way he avoided talking to me like before. Small details that, when put together, become a storm we only recognize when it's already tearing everything apart. And I know that while you listen to this, something inside you shifts. Because stories between mothers and children always stir something deep, especially when they involve pain, ingratitude, loss, disrespect, aggression, anger, and that feeling of fighting alone inside your own home. These are stories that cross generations, cultures, borders, stories that make you exhale and wonder, why is it so hard for some people to see the love they were given? I want you to stay with me until the very end of this story. Because what happened after that slap wasn't simple. It wasn't quick, it wasn't pretty, but it was real, it was human, it was deep. And if you listen through to the end, you might discover something in this story that speaks directly to your own life, something that explains your own pain, something that answers questions you still haven't been able to say out loud, something that shows you that faith may tremble, but it doesn't break, that a soul may bleed, but it doesn't die, and that a mother, even wounded, betrayed, broken, still finds strength in places no one else sees. And the truth is that the wound that marked my face that day wasn't the worst one. The worst was the one that opened here inside, right in the center of my chest, in that place where we keep what is most precious to us: hope, love, the memory of what we believed could never break. And that's the wound I'm going to tell you about now. Because as painful as it is to admit, that slap didn't just hit my face, it hit our story. It hit our relationship. It hit something I thought could never be destroyed. But it didn't defeat my faith, and that's where everything begins. I don't know exactly when my son started to lose himself inside his own home, but when I close my eyes and go back in time, I realize it began in such a quiet, subtle way that it seemed impossible to imagine where it would lead. In the beginning, it was just small changes, details that anyone else would have ignored. But a mother ignores nothing. I noticed the way he came home avoiding my eyes, as if he were carrying something he didn't want me to see. I noticed how restless he was, pacing back and forth, taking deep breaths like someone trying to hide a storm brewing inside their own chest. And even then, I told myself it was just a phase, that every young person goes through difficult moments, that he just needed time. I had no idea that time was opening a distance between us so wide that not even my faith could reach him. That's how the atmosphere began to sour. First slowly, almost imperceptibly, like when you leave a fruit too long in the bowl. Outside it still looks fine, but inside it has already begun to spoil. He'd come home irritated, answer me sharply, avoid conversation, showing a constant impatience as if every word I said were an added weight on his shoulders. And I tried to understand, tried to talk, tried to pull him back toward me, but every attempt pushed him deeper into the growing abyss between us. It was as if he had built an invisible wall around his own heart, a wall I couldn't break with affection or patience or even prayer. As the weeks passed, I noticed he was no longer the same inside our home. What used to be routine turned to conflict. What used to be simple became argument. I'd ask a basic question, and he'd respond with sarcasm. I'd cook his favorite meal, and he'd say he didn't want it. I'd try to talk about his day, and he'd give me silence or sharp answers, as if my voice had become something uncomfortable to him. And each of those moments took another piece from my heart, because I knew the house was still the same, I was still the same, but he was no longer the boy I raised with so much effort, so much love, so much faith. I remember clearly the first time I felt fear. Not fear of him, but fear for him. Fear of what was happening inside him. He'd come home late, exhausted, like he was carrying the weight of the world, irritated at everything and everyone, vulnerable in a way he didn't want to admit. And there were people around him, people I noticed from a distance, people who smiled with their lips but whose eyes held something poisonous. People who can't stand seeing a good heart thrive, people who feed insecurities, who plant mistrust, who pull a family apart just to take a place that never belonged to them. It's incredible how certain people can slip into a young person's life and turn their mind upside down. And the more he absorbed those outside voices, the less he heard mine, as if a mother's voice had lost its value, as if the advice that once guided his steps had become noise. He began to act like a stranger. Someone who shared the same roof but no longer shared the same soul. He avoided sitting with me, avoided talking, avoided even meeting my eyes. It was as if he were ashamed of something, hiding something, fighting something inside himself that I couldn't see, something that was destroying him from the inside out. And that spiritual distance was the worst part, because when you lose the conversation, you lose the connection. When you lose the connection, you lose the trust. And when trust breaks, the home becomes a minefield. Any word can explode, any gesture can be misread as attack, any silence becomes accusation. Peace disappears, and the home becomes a place where love has to hide so it won't be crushed by anger. One night I heard him arguing with someone on the phone. His voice was elevated, full of resentment, full of pain. And when he realized I was nearby, he hung up right in front of me without making eye contact. That was when I understood that something much bigger was going on. Something I didn't know, and perhaps he didn't know how to explain. He was losing himself. He was drowning. And even though I could see it, I couldn't pull him back. That feeling of helplessness is one of the worst pains a mother can face. Over time, his presence in the house became a shadow. He left early, came home late, barely ate, barely slept, barely spoke. I felt there was a war going on inside him. A silent war he tried to hide behind harsh attitudes and sharp words. But a mother feels. A mother sees what no one else sees. A mother knows when her child is drowning on the inside, even when he pretends to be fine on the outside. And that transformation in him began corroding everything around us. The house felt heavy, charged. It was like a dark cloud had settled inside the walls. And the more I tried to reach him, with love, the more he pulled away, the more irritated he became, the more he treated me like I was the problem in his life. And that began opening deep cracks between us, cracks no one else could see, but that were there, growing, spreading, announcing the tragic moment that was coming. Because the truth is, the slap was just the tip of the iceberg. The physical aggression was the final stage of a pain he had been feeding for months, maybe years, a pain he swallowed, hid, denied, until it turned into resentment. And once resentment takes root, it consumes everything: dialogue, trust, affection. And he had let that resentment grow like weeds inside his soul. Deep down, I knew that blow wasn't aimed at me, but at everything he felt and didn't know how to express. But that didn't make it hurt any less. It only made it more tragic. Knowing my son was so distant, so lost, so disconnected from who he truly was. That hurt more than the physical pain. Because I knew my son. I knew his heart. And that behavior wasn't him. It was the result of wrong choices, wrong influences, wrong company, untreated wounds, frustrations piling up. And while I tried to gather all the pieces of this story, trying to understand where everything began to fall apart, I realized I, too, was changing. Something inside me was waking up, a strength I didn't know I had, a resilience only a mother understands. Because when life tries to crush you through the person you love the most, you either crumble or you rise, stronger than you've ever been. And inside me, something was rising. And that's why you need to stay with me until the end of this story. Because what comes next reveals things many people hide inside their homes. And if you aren't subscribed to this channel yet, subscribe now. Not for me, for yourself. Because here we speak truths most people are afraid to say out loud. We tell stories many live in silence. And we reveal secrets that can open your eyes and your soul. What's coming next may be the missing piece in your own life. Something that can show you that you're not crazy, you're not alone, you're not lost. Subscribe so you don't miss what's coming, because the part still ahead has the power to touch the deepest pains and the deepest desires hidden inside you. I remember the boy he once was, and that memory is so vivid inside me that it hurts. Because when I look at the man who hurt me, I can't see the same little boy I held in my arms, the one who wrapped his small hand around mine with such trust as if I were his entire world. And maybe that's exactly what eats me alive on the inside, knowing that the man who lost himself is the same boy who once believed I was the most important person in his life. When he was born, I thought I already knew what love was, but I didn't. Real love, the kind that grows roots, the kind that changes you forever, began the moment I heard his first cry. I held that tiny, fragile body and felt like God had placed a piece of heaven in my hands. He was bright, cheerful, curious, the kind of child who lights up a home just by walking into the room. I remember how he called for me, the way his eyes lit up when I came home from work, the way he ran toward me with his arms open as if nothing in the world was safer than my embrace. And I truly believed that would never change. It's impossible not to remember every detail. He had his own special ways of showing affection, sometimes with words, sometimes with gestures. A quick kiss on the cheek, a little drawing made with colored pencils saying, "Mom, I love you." A crooked note stuck to the fridge with old magnets. I still keep them all, as if they were rare jewels, because they are memories of a time when everything was simple, when love was easy, when my presence alone was enough to calm any fear he had. And it's cruel to think that the same child who once filled me with so much love could one day allow anger to take over so completely that he'd raise his hand against me. When he was little, I used to sit on the couch and watch him play. He'd talk to his toys, create stories, invent whole worlds, and call me to join him. And sometimes I wonder, at what point did he stop inviting me into the worlds he created? When did I stop being his safe place and become someone he pushed away? I remember his smile, the wide one that showed every tooth, the smile that reflected innocence, purity, trust. And when I compare it to the closed, hardened expression he carries now, to the eyes full of hurt, it feels like I'm looking at two completely different people. The contrast hurts. It hurts because I know who he was. It hurts because I know who he could have continued to be. Maybe that's what wounds a mother the most, realizing that her child forgot the woman who lifted him up, who protected him, who sacrificed so much in silence, who gave up so many things so he could have everything. And no matter how much I try to understand that life changes people, that the world hardens them, that pain reshapes them, it's still devastating to accept that, to him, I became someone distant, almost inconvenient, as if a lifetime of love had vanished from his memory. And it doesn't matter how many times I remind myself that the guilt isn't mine. In the end, a mother always wonders where she went wrong, even when deep down she knows she didn't. Even when she gave everything, even when she broke herself in 1,000 pieces to be mother, father, teacher, nurse, counselor, therapist. Mothers always end up carrying the guilt the world throws on their backs. I remember the nights when he was afraid of the dark and called for me softly. I'd walk to his room, sit beside the bed, stroke his hair, and stay there until he fell asleep again. And it's strange to think that the same boy who once sought safety in my presence now struggles to look at me without resentment. Sometimes I wish I could go back into that childhood bedroom, touch him on the shoulder and say, "My son, what happened to you along the way? Where did you get lost?" I know many people hearing this know exactly what I mean, because this pain isn't just mine. This pain belongs to mothers all over the world, mothers who raised their children with love and are now treated as if they were responsible for the wounds those children carry. If you know what I'm talking about, write "I know" in the comments, because people who live this don't need explanations. One sentence is enough for them to recognize their own story. When I think about the past, I remember so many beautiful moments that sometimes I wonder if they really happened, or if my mind created softer memories just to soothe the pain I feel now. But I know I didn't make them up. I lived every one of them. I lived his first day of school, his shyness, his fear of being away from me. I lived his joy when he learned to ride a bike. I lived his tears when he fell and scraped his knee. And I lived the way he calmed down the moment he heard my voice. How can someone who found so much safety in his mother's arms grow up into someone so distant? I was his safe harbor, and he was my daily motivation. Waking up early, working hard, enduring humiliations, giving up my own joys. Everything I did was to make sure he had a better life than mine. He grew up watching my struggles, my sacrifices, my pain hidden behind forced smiles, and I truly believed that would plant gratitude, love, respect inside him. But the world doesn't. Always give children the awareness mothers hope for. Sometimes the world stains them, confuses them, hardens them. And suddenly I realized that the sweet boy turned into a man filled with shadows he never learned how to face. But memory is powerful. And as I relive these moments from his childhood, I realize the cruelest part of this whole story. He forgot who I was to him. The son forgot the mother, forgot the sleepless nights, the medicine given at dawn, the birthday parties organized without money, the advice repeated with patience, the tears swallowed so he wouldn't worry. He forgot that when the world turned its back on him, I was the only one who stayed. And even so, even with all of that, he let anger grow inside him, bigger than the love we built together. And I know that whoever is listening to me now feels that sting inside the chest, because this isn't just my story. It's the story of many mothers, many grandmothers, many women who gave everything and got ingratitude in return. If you've ever felt that, write "I didn't deserve this" in the comments, because that sentence sums up the pain of someone who knows they did everything right and still carry wounds they never asked for. And no matter how much I try to move forward, no matter how much I try to understand, my mind always returns to the same image, the smiling little boy running through the house calling "Mom," as if that word were magic, as if it could fix anything he felt. And now he says that same word with hardness, as if the weight of life swallowed all the sweetness it once held. But as I dive into these memories, I realize something even deeper. It wasn't just me he forgot. He forgot himself, forgot his own heart, his own essence, his own soul. That sweet boy is still in there somewhere, buried under layers of pain, resentment, frustration, and influences that reshaped him. And that's why I continue. That's why I tell this story to the end. That's why I don't give up on him or on myself. Because a mother, even wounded, can still see what her child left behind. And I know that even in pain, this story still has something that needs to be said, something that needs to be revealed, something that needs to be understood before any ending can even begin to form. If you feel this story touching something inside you, stay with me. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, subscribe now, because stories like this aren't just stories. They're mirrors, warnings, invisible embraces. Here you'll find truths many people live in silence, pains you don't have to carry alone, and secrets that can open your eyes to things you never noticed before. Don't miss what's coming next, because what I'm about to reveal might be exactly what your heart has been needing to hear. When his words started turning into blades, I realized the slap I had taken wasn't the worst blow of the night. The worst part came afterward, when he opened his mouth and unleashed phrases I never imagined hearing. From my own son, phrases that felt crafted to wound, to tear, to reduce me to almost nothing. He started slowly, with that cold tone he'd been using for months. But that night, there was something different, something heavier, as if he'd been holding it in for a long time and had finally found a reason to explode. And when he did, it wasn't just anger. It was twisted hurt, distorted memories of old events, ghosts from the past he never had the courage to face, now being thrown at me as if they were all my fault. I remember the very first sentence he said after the slap. It hit me like a silent knife. He looked straight into my eyes with a look that no longer held anything of the boy I raised, and told me I had never done anything for him. Nothing, as if years of sacrifice meant nothing, as if sleepless nights, overdue bills, hard choices, struggle, love, all of it had been something I made up. When I heard that, it felt like the air had been ripped from my chest, because that wasn't just a lie, it was erasure. It was like he had taken my entire story and thrown it away. If you've ever felt something like that, comment erased, because that's exactly how a mother feels when her own child chooses to forget the truth she built with sweat and tears. And he didn't stop there. He began reconstructing the past in the cruelest way, as if every beautiful moment had turned into something bitter, as if every memory had been twisted just to justify the pain he carried. He said I had been too harsh, that I had demanded too much, that I never understood his feelings, that I chose everything for him, as if he never had the right to his own life. It was unbelievable to watch him speak with such confidence about things that never happened, as if he had rewritten his entire childhood just to blame me for everything that went wrong in his life. And the more he talked, the more I realized he wasn't fighting with me. He was fighting with himself. But still, every word felt like a brick, dropped onto my chest. He accused me of things I never did. He said I had destroyed his dreams, said I was responsible for his bad choices, as if his life being in chaos was somehow my fault. And even knowing how unfair it all was, my heart shattered every time he opened his mouth. Because injustice hurts more than anger. Ingratitude cuts deeper than aggression. Words wound more violently than hands. He kept shouting that I was worthless, that I was the cause of his frustrations, that I always wanted to control everything. And while he screamed, I saw a man I didn't recognize, a man hiding behind anger so he wouldn't have to face his own shame, a man who preferred to blame his mother instead of admitting his own failures. And that ripped pieces from me, because I knew that wasn't the son I raised. I knew. And that certainty is what destroys you from the inside. Knowing the person accusing you is the same person who once called you my queen, my strength, my safe place. There was one moment I'll never forget. He said I was a burden in his life, a burden, as if the woman who gave everything had now become something heavy to carry. I didn't cry then. My tears stayed trapped, burning inside me, because I knew that if I cried, he'd use that as another weapon. But inside, I collapsed. That is one of the cruelest sentences a mother can hear. And if those words have ever been thrown at you, write "I'm not a burden" in the comments, because no one deserves to carry that kind of injustice. He went on talking as if he were unloading years of bottled-up pain, a pain misdirected, misunderstood, fed by outside influence and by his own refusal to look inward. He accused me of not giving him freedom, when in truth I gave him more freedom than any single mother could afford to give. He accused me of not believing in him, when in reality I was the only one standing beside him in his darkest phases. He accused me of abandoning him emotionally, when the truth is, I abandoned myself to keep him standing. Listening to those distortions, those lies turned into facts inside his mind, felt like my soul was being crushed slowly. And that's exactly what so many people don't understand. Sometimes a child doesn't need to raise a hand to destroy his mother. He destroys her with words. He destroys her with accusations. He destroys her with twisted interpretations. He turns into a narrative. He destroys her when he chooses to see his mother as the enemy, so he doesn't have to face the pain he can't handle. And that's what happened to me that night. He wasn't fighting me. He was fighting his own life, but using my skin as the target, using my heart as an emotional punching bag, using my story as the scapegoat for his mistakes. When he said he resented me, something inside me tore open, because resentment is the kind of emotion that kills slowly. Then he said he was ashamed of me, and that word echoed inside my chest like a silent thunder. Ashamed. Me, who gave everything. Me, who faced the world for him. Me, who stayed standing when everything else fell apart. Hearing that he was ashamed of me felt like my whole existence had been dismissed in 1 second. And the worst part is looking into the eyes of the person saying those things and seeing that they believe it, truly believe it. There is nothing more devastating than watching the lie someone created about you become stronger than the reality you built with so much sacrifice. It's like your truth was erased from the mind of the person you love the most, and every word he spoke kept pressing, crushing, breaking. He said he wished he had grown up in another home. He said I held him back. He said I never let him be who he wanted to be. He said I suffocated him. He said I disappointed him. And while he talked, I felt the house shrinking around us, as if the walls were silent witnesses to a moment no mother should ever endure. And yet, even hearing all of that, something inside me still didn't hate him. Because a mother doesn't hate. A mother hurts. A mother bleeds. A mother withstands. A mother suffers in silence. A mother tries to understand even what's impossible to understand. A mother sees beyond the anger, beyond the pain, beyond the harsh words. A mother sees the boy behind the broken man. A mother feels the child hiding inside the lost adult. A mother recognizes the wounded soul behind the aggression. And while he kept going, I realized every word he said revealed more about his own pain than about me. He was shouting at his own life, but using my story as the target because it was easier. Because the love I gave him created in him the certainty that I would withstand everything, even what I didn't deserve. And maybe that's the tragedy of strong mothers. They become the place where their children unload what the world did to them. And I knew that wasn't the end. The story still had so much to reveal, so much to unravel, so much to be understood. Because behind every cruel word there was a reason, a past, an influence, a hidden truth. And that's exactly what I still need to tell you, because the most painful part of this story wasn't the slap or the words. It was what happened after, when the masks began to fall, and the real source of all that anger finally started to show. When he decided to leave, he didn't make a sound. He didn't slam the door, didn't give a speech, didn't look back. He just grabbed some clothes shoved into an old backpack and left as if he were stepping out for a moment, as if he weren't ripping a piece of my life out with him. I stood there, watching every movement, trying to understand if it was really happening or if it was just another tense moment that would pass in a few hours. But it didn't pass. He was determined. And what haunted me wasn't the act of leaving itself. It was the coldness, the calm of someone who seems to be walking away, not just from a house, but from an entire story. He didn't touch me, didn't hug me, didn't hesitate. He just left. And when the door closed, the silence that remained was so deep, it felt heavy. A silence that screamed. A silence that suffocated. I stayed there, standing in the same spot where I'd taken the slap, where I'd heard the words that were still echoing inside me, and it felt like the house had lost all its air. He didn't just take his clothes. He took his presence, our routine, the noise I always complained about, but would give anything to hear again now. His absence was so big it almost felt like another body in the room. It's strange how emptiness can feel so alive. The house felt bigger, colder, more distant, as if it had stretched out by several feet in just a few seconds, just to remind me that I was alone. The silence spread through the hallway, seeped into the rooms, sat down next to me on the couch, and no matter how deeply I tried to breathe, every breath tasted like abandonment. I walked slowly through the house. I touched the furniture as if it could give me some kind of answer. I ran my hand over the back of the chair where he always sat, even when he was irritated, even when he avoided looking at me. I opened his bedroom door and felt a chill run down my spine. The room looked the same, but everything was different. His absence had changed it. The bed was too neat, clothes he'd left on the floor still there, his scent still hanging in the air, mixed with the feeling that this was now a place frozen in time. I stepped in slowly, like I was walking into the space of someone who would never come back. And there, in that room that used to be full of life, I felt every bit of strength inside me shake. I sat on the edge of the bed and felt such a weight in my chest, it seemed like the mattress would sink under it. And there, in the silence, in the loneliness, in the pain, the first question cut through me. Is he coming back? not as a desperate question, but as a bitter realization that I didn't have control over anything, not over him leaving, not over him coming back. And accepting that is one of the deepest pains a mother can feel. Realizing that the child you carried for 9 months, the one you picked up off the ground when he fell, the one you taught to walk, now walks away from you, and there's nothing you can do. That's the kind of loneliness no one talks about, the loneliness of a mother who loses her child to the world without warning, without protection, without goodbye. I stared at the wall in his room, where there was still a pen mark he'd made when he was 7. I should have painted over it, fixed it, cleaned it, but I never did, and now I understand why. Because that mark was a reminder that one day he was a child, one day he loved me with the kind of pure love only children have. One day he saw me as the only person in the world who could protect him. And seeing that mark on the wall while his absence filled every corner around me made my heart tremble. And if you listening to me right now have ever felt that kind of longing for someone who's still alive but no longer present, write "I know how it feels" in the comments. Because that pain has a name, a shape, a weight, and only those who live it truly understand. I stood up slowly and walked back to the living room. Every step felt heavier than the last. I sat on the couch, and the silence sat with me. That was the moment the loneliness hit with full force. Not the loneliness of someone who is physically alone, but the loneliness of someone who has just lost something essential. A part of my life had just walked out the door, and I didn't know if it would ever return. And that feeling of being left, even when you know you didn't do anything to deserve it, is one of the cruelest things there is, because it confuses you, scrambles your thoughts, makes you question everything you said, everything you did, everything you believed was right. And even knowing I hadn't done wrong, something inside me still tried to find reasons for him leaving. I closed my eyes and let the silence hold me, and that's when I felt the first spark of something different. It wasn't peace, not yet. It was something deeper, more subtle, a feeling that didn't come from my mind or my body. It came from my soul, as if, deep beneath that huge pain, a new awareness was beginning to rise. The awareness that no matter how much I wanted to grab my son by the arm and bring him back home, there was a greater force guiding everything, something I didn't understand, but that seemed to be telling me this story still had chapters I couldn't see. It was as if the silence were trying to tell me something, not about my son, about me. The house felt like it was watching my every move. The floor creaked differently. The walls seemed farther away. The wind coming through the window sounded like it was whispering truths I wasn't ready to hear yet. And inside that heavy loneliness, inside that burning pain, a thought began to grow. Maybe he had to leave for me to finally see what I couldn't see while he was still here. Maybe the distance would reveal not just the collapse of our relationship, but its roots. Maybe losing was the only way to understand. And as that thought took shape inside me, I felt there was still something I needed to discover, something I wasn't seeing, something that explained all that anger that hadn't appeared out of nowhere. And the more I let the loneliness surround me, the more I realized that silence wasn't destroying me. It was preparing me for what was coming, preparing me to look at my life differently, preparing me to face truths I might have been avoiding for years. And that's exactly why, even in that unbearable pain, even in that huge emptiness, I knew I had to keep breathing. I had to stay standing, because something inside me knew that story was far from over, and that what came next would demand every bit of strength I had, and more. And while I tried to find some kind of meaning in that bitter night, something inside me started shifting into place, as if it were getting ready for a new chapter, a new understanding, a new revelation that was about to happen, even though I still had no idea what it would be. Because sometimes, on the very day someone walks out of your life, that's the day the truth finally starts making its way toward you. When the house finally went completely quiet, when the last trace of his presence disappeared from the hallway, when even the air felt heavy on top of me, like it wanted to push me down, I felt my legs give out, not from physical weakness, but from the emotional exhaustion of carrying a pain that didn't even have a proper name yet, a pain that cuts through the soul like a slow blade. I leaned my hands on the wall, took a deep breath, but it was like the air wouldn't go in. It felt like everything inside me was stuck, like the pain had taken the place of my breath. That's when I felt a deep, almost instinctive need to kneel. Not because I planned it, not because I had strength left to do it, but because the floor felt like the only place where I could exist without falling apart completely. I knelt right there, in the middle of the living room, where I used to see him rushing past, where I had laughed, cried, argued, and overcome so many things. I knelt because it was the only gesture strong enough to hold the weight my emotions could no longer carry. I knelt because there comes a moment in the life of a woman marked by pain when there's nowhere else to run, no one else to call, no way left to pretend to be strong. And that night, I stopped pretending. I stopped holding myself together. I stopped trying to look unshakable. I stopped trying to understand everything with my mind. I knelt simply because my soul asked me to, because my spirit begged, because my body couldn't handle the battle anymore. I closed my eyes, and for the first time since everything happened, I let the tears fall. They weren't the kind of tears that slipped down slowly. They crashed. They fell hot, heavy, like they were carrying years of silence, years of swallowed pain, years of stories I kept only to myself. And there, on that cold floor, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, the truth of my exhaustion, the emotional exhaustion of a mother who loved too much, fought too hard, tried too long, believed even when no one else did, a kind of exhaustion that no human remedy can cure, only something spiritual can touch. And that was when I started to pray. Not a memorized prayer, not that rehearsed prayer we learn as children. It was a torn, open prayer, raw, honest, deep, a prayer that came straight from the place where the pain was lodged. And the words came, not because I thought of them, but because my faith brought them. Help me. Those were the first words, simple, short, bare, words that carry inside them the cry of someone who has tried everything. And as I repeated that plea, I felt as if something were listening to me. I can't explain it, but it was like, in that piece of floor, in that silent dawn, I was finally seen, not as a mother, not as a woman, not just as someone wounded, but as a soul. I kept praying. I asked for strength. I asked for protection. I asked for clarity. Because deep down, what hurt the most wasn't just the slap. It wasn't the cruel words. It wasn't him walking out the door. What hurt the most was the emptiness, the uncertainty, the fear of not knowing what would come next, the fear of not knowing whether I'd still have the strength to go on. And as I spoke those words, I felt a gentle presence, a peace that didn't come from me, a quiet light that didn't erase the pain, but illuminated a path inside it. Because faith works like that. It doesn't close the wounds all at once. It lights a candle inside the darkness. And sometimes, one candle is all we need to not give up. I took a deep breath and felt something different for the first time that night. It wasn't joy. It wasn't comfort. It wasn't a solution. It was survival. It was as if the prayer had tied my soul together before it could break, as if it had held my pieces in place, as if it had reminded me that even though I was alone in the house, I wasn't alone in the world. And that feeling, that certainty that there is something greater than pain, greater than abandonment, greater than injustice, began spreading inside me slowly, like someone relighting a flame that was almost gone. Still, kneeling, I said things I had been terrified to admit, even to myself. I talked about the fear of losing my son forever. I talked about the sense of failure that tried to settle inside me. I talked about the guilt I knew wasn't mine, but kept knocking at my door anyway. I talked about missing the boy he used to be. I talked about the desperate urge to protect him, even from a distance. I talked about everything I couldn't say in front of anyone. And every word spoken was a memory being released, a pain finding its way out, a weakness finding courage to be named. And that was when the prayer began to transform me, not on the outside, but on the inside. It started in the hidden place, where the pain was stuck like rust. It cleaned that place first, then it spread to everything else, slowly but steady. And I felt something unexplainable. For the first time that night, I wasn't holding up the world alone. Someone was holding it with me. And anyone who has ever felt that knows there is no more powerful feeling. If you've ever felt a peace that didn't make sense, a calm that arrived on your worst day, write "I felt it" in the comments. because that kind of testimony strengthens women who are listening right now. As I kept praying, I asked for one more thing: light over his heart. I asked that the anger that took over his face that night be dissolved. I asked that any influence surrounding his soul be removed. I asked God to touch the places I could no longer reach, because when a child grows up and gets lost, there are depths no mother can reach, but faith can. Faith enters where we cannot enter. Faith touches where our words no longer have power. Faith heals what we can't even touch. And as I asked that, I felt something inside me quiet down. It wasn't the certainty that everything would be fine. It was the certainty that I would stand, that I would survive that night, that I would survive the slap, the cruel words, his absence, that my story didn't end there, on the floor, with a burning face and a bleeding heart, that there was a purpose hidden inside the pain, a purpose I still didn't understand, but that was beginning to pulse quietly inside me. I stood up slowly, with my face wet and my eyes still burning. But I didn't stand up as the woman who had fallen. I stood up as someone who had found something on that floor, a strength I didn't even know existed, an ancient strength, ancestral, flowing through the veins of every woman who has survived. Abandonment, rejection, or lovelessness. And that strength made me breathe again, made me see again, made me believe again, because faith doesn't erase what happened. It lights the way toward what's still coming. And when I fully stood, I felt that prayer had opened a door inside me, a door I didn't know where it would lead, but one I knew I needed to walk through, because the story wasn't over yet, because something was waiting for me ahead, something I needed to discover, understand, confront, and transform. And even without knowing what it was, I knew my soul had been prepared for the next step. When the weight of that prayer settled inside me, like it had finally found the right place to rest, I realized that something in my soul was wider awake, more alert, as if a silent light had been turned on deep inside, shining over parts of me I never had the courage to face. That light didn't ease the pain of what happened, didn't erase the memory of his hand on my face, didn't immediately wash away the cruel words he had thrown like burning metal, but it clarified something that had been buried beneath my sadness. There was a truth behind all of this, a truth he didn't see, a truth I myself took a long time to recognize, a truth that God had already seen long before, even while I was desperately trying to understand where everything had started. And that truth began revealing itself slowly, not like some grand revelation, but like small fragments rising in my mind, fragments I had ignored before, now fitting together like pieces of a puzzle I had never been able to understand. I started remembering old conversations, suspicious phrases he repeated that didn't sound like him, the way his expression changed when the phone rang, the discomfort he showed whenever I mentioned certain topics. I started remembering the people who had gotten close to him in recent months, people with sweet speeches but eyes that carried something twisted, something no mother trusts. And the more I remembered, the more I realized that the anger wasn't mine. I had simply been the easiest target. The truth was that my son had been manipulated, and I hadn't seen it. Manipulated emotionally, spiritually, psychologically. Someone had planted seeds in him, seeds of fear, of doubt, of resentment, and those seeds grew quietly, like weeds spreading until they choked the entire garden. He had been fed lies about me, lies he accepted because they were spoken at a moment when he was most vulnerable, most fragile, most insecure. And a wounded person will cling to anything that validates their pain. I remembered a particular woman, a person who hovered around his life, offering advice disguised as concern, opinions disguised as affection, criticism disguised as honesty. A woman who smiled at me, but whose eyes never matched the smile. A woman who knew exactly where my son's wounds were, his frustrations, his fears, and used every one of them to turn his heart against me. She planted little phrases, little insinuations, little distortions that, repeated long enough, turned into truths inside his mind. And I realized that this toxic influence was behind so many of his behaviors, including the explosion of rage that night. Understanding that brought an even deeper pain, because I realized my son wasn't just lost. He was being led by someone who used his weaknesses against him. led by someone who saw his emotional instability as the perfect opening to gain control and reshape his view of me. And while I tried talking, guiding, reaching for the boy I had raised, she worked in the shadows telling him I was the problem, that I was oppressive, that I suffocated him, that I ruined his freedom, that I was the reason for every difficulty he faced. And he, carrying unresolved pain, believed it. I also began to see his insecurities more clearly, the guilt he had carried silently, the wounds I never mentioned aloud because I knew they were still tender inside him. He always feared failure, always feared not being enough, always carried a weight that wasn't his to carry, but one he believed belonged on his shoulders. And when something in his life went wrong, he looked for the nearest person to blame. And as always, the mother becomes the mirror where a child throws his own flaws so he doesn't have to face them directly. That's why he shouted at me as if shouting at his past. That's why he accused me as if trying to escape from his own guilt. He wasn't fighting me. He was fighting himself. But he used my image as a shield. And this realization brings a kind of pain only someone who's lived it understands. It's not the pain of anger. It's not the pain of revenge. It's a deep, bitter, lonely pain. The pain of realizing that someone you love was broken inside without you ever noticing. The pain of seeing that the child you raised with so much love, faith, and sacrifice had been hurt internally by influences you didn't see coming. The pain of knowing his attack on me wasn't born from cruelty, but from wounds he never learned to heal. And the more this truth revealed itself to me, the more I felt a strange mix of sadness and clarity, as if for the first time I could actually see what had been happening. God saw everything long before I did. He saw the hidden conversations, the whispered comments behind my back, the lies planted like seeds, the manipulation twisting my son's spirit. He saw his heart being molded by empty promises and sweet words hiding rotten intentions. And when I understood that, I realized his rage wasn't the end of our story. It was simply the outcome of an invisible war happening inside him. That was when I saw another truth. His pain wasn't his fault. His pain wasn't malice. His pain was reflection. A reflection of traumas he never told me about. A reflection of expectations he couldn't meet. A reflection of pressure he put on himself. A reflection of insecurities he carried like chains around his ankles. And seeing that ignited a deep compassion, one only a mother can feel, the kind of compassion that understands a wounded child, hurts others because he's hurting, not because he wants to cause pain. If you understand this kind of pain, write "I see it" in the comments, because seeing the truth behind the anger is a step many mothers never manage to take, not because they don't want to, but because the pain sometimes screams louder than understanding. And still, that night, as I began fitting these pieces together, inside me, I realized I had to look beyond what he did. I had to see what he felt. I had to look behind the blow, behind the words, behind the departure. And the more I understood, the more I realized that his anger wasn't my enemy. It was a symptom, the symptom of a soul crying for help in the worst way possible. And that truth, as painful as it was, lit a strength inside me I didn't know I had, because by understanding the origin of his pain, I began to understand what the next step in my own path would be. The story wasn't over yet. There was still so much I needed to uncover, and there was an even greater revelation coming, one that would change everything I thought I knew about that night, about my son, and about myself. There are moments in life when silence speaks louder than any word, and when he came back after all those months, he brought with him a silence full of stories I didn't know yet. It wasn't the silence of anger or avoidance or defensiveness. It was a tired silence, a broken silence, a silence that seemed to ask for care without asking for anything at all. He didn't look me in the eyes right away, but he didn't look away either. He walked slowly through the house, like someone testing his own heart to see if it could handle returning to a place where he had been harsh, unfair, cruel. And when he finally lifted his face, I saw something I hadn't seen in a long time. Humanity. Not perfection, not full repentance, not a complete transformation, but a beginning, a small opening. That kind of look that says, I came because something inside me told me to come back. And sometimes, Chris, that's all a mother needs, an opening. A crack so small you can barely see it, but big enough for an entire new story to pass through. He sat in the living room like someone trying to get used to his own presence in that space again, and I sat across from him, not as someone waiting for explanations, excuses, or confessions, but as someone who understands that certain wounds don't explain themselves, they reveal themselves slowly. The air between us felt full of everything we didn't manage to say before, and yet, this time, it didn't hurt the same way. I was no longer the broken woman who fell to the floor that night. Prayer had lifted me, solitude had shaped me, truth had strengthened me. I wasn't asking for answers anymore. I was asking for clarity. And at that moment, clarity came in the form of one long, heavy sigh from him, almost an involuntary confession. He began speaking slowly, stumbling over his words like someone tripping over their own guilt. He talked about the exhaustion, the confusion, the weight he'd been carrying, the anger he didn't understand, the influences that pulled him away, the pain he didn't know how to organize. He didn't ask for forgiveness outright, but every sentence was a silent plea. It was as if he were returning to me piece by piece, everything he had torn from me months before, and I listened with my heart open. Not because I'm a saint, but because I had already learned that healing doesn't happen when someone else repents. Healing happens when you decide you won't carry what was destroying you anymore. And that's when I discovered a truth that set me free. Forgiveness wasn't a gift I gave to him. It was a gift I gave to myself. I didn't forgive because he deserved it. I forgave because I deserved peace. I forgave because the slap hurt my skin, but I wouldn't let the wound mark my soul. I forgave because carrying that pain any longer would mean allowing the worst moment of my life to define who I was. And I am more than that. I always was. I was made of faith, of strength, of resilience. Pain tried to shape me, but faith raised me up. When I looked at him in that living room, I was no longer the shattered mother. I was a whole woman, a rebuilt woman, a woman who had walked through a dark valley and still carried light in her eyes. And when he saw that, his gaze finally changed. Not because I said anything, but because he saw something. He saw that I survived a storm he never imagined would be so big. He saw that the woman he tried to break stood up even stronger. And maybe that was the moment his heart began to come home. I took a deep breath and let my chest fill with the lightness that comes when you finally understand that some battles aren't won through force, but through surrender. And with that surrender, I found a name for what had happened inside me. Liberation. Not the kind that forgets what happened, but the kind that refuses to let that night become the centerpiece of my life. Liberation that understands love doesn't mean accepting everything, and forgiveness doesn't mean erasing anything. Forgiveness means moving forward. And I moved forward, with light where there had once been shadow. And before this video ends, I want to tell you something born from my story, but meant for yours too. You don't have to keep carrying the burdens, the world placed on your shoulders. You have the right to heal. You have the right to peace. You have the right to stand up even when no one believes you can. And most importantly, you have the right to leave behind everything that tried to erase who you are. And that's exactly why you can't stop here. The story I told today touched something deep inside you. I know it did. And there's another video waiting for you on the screen right now, bringing another truth, another strength, another revelation. That can illuminate parts of your life you haven't even noticed yet. It's not a continuation of this story, but it is a continuation of your journey. Because every video from the Matriarch Secrets is a piece of the path you're walking. And skipping the next one means missing something your soul may be needing today. So click on the next video. Don't delay. It's there for a reason. And that reason has everything to do with you. Your story, your pain, your secrets, the things you carry in your chest and have never said out loud. Go now. The next video is calling you. Your journey doesn't end here. It's only beginning.